Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. I'm your host, Dan Clamert, and this week on episode 31, we are going to be discussing success and design best practices with Ekahau. And you may have seen Matt's video on YouTube. This video has over 10,000 views. We're going to be talking about some other things here on the episode, but I'd like to welcome Matt Starling, Senior Director from Ekahau. Welcome, Matt. How are you doing today?
Dan, I am doing really well, thank you. Thank you so much for having us on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. So before we get into it, just a couple reminders here for our viewers. We, as always, can take your live questions on today's episode. If you interject those via Slido, I can jump in and during the presentation or discussion today, I can ask your questions live to Matt. And otherwise, we also do have some people on the line here monitoring the questions. But if you want to join via Slido, you can do that via the YouTube. There's a link and also there's a QR code on the screen to join the Slido, submit your questions there. And if we have time, we'll interject those questions during the show. So as usual, this session is being recorded and is available on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@getunplugged. And also you can register and see upcoming episodes at cs.co/getunplugged. All right. And now on with the show. Matt, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dan. And it's really my pleasure to be here to talk about our combined awesome relationship between Ekahau and Cisco. And we are going to be diving into a really cool case study that we actually deployed a ton of Cisco wireless access points and a load of challenges we came across and some of the really cool, unique ways that we can solve it. So, like Dan said, I'm Matt from Ekahau, and I think since we've got so many people here on the show today, and I know loads of people watch this awesome YouTube channel of yours, is that we all know how important Wi-Fi is to businesses these days. It's absolutely mission critical. If Wi-Fi stops, businesses stop, and that is exactly the case study that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about a huge warehouse that if the Wi-Fi isn't working or isn't operational, it really grinds the business to a halt. And what I find really fascinating about some of these stats on this slide is about how many hours a day people are spending troubleshooting Wi-Fi networks, and also the average data breach for a security breach is like around nearly $4.5 million. So it's not only just a case of having awesome, great, high-performing Wi-Fi networks, but we really need to keep them as secure as possible as well. So how we're doing that between ourselves, Ekahau and Cisco is we're making really powerful tools, software and hardware. But what we really want to try and do is make them more intuitive, easier to use, lower that barrier of entry. So if you haven't got a Wi-Fi PhD, you can still understand the data that you're looking at, have great performing Wi-Fi networks, and also keep them as secure as possible. So how we do that at Ekahau, you might have heard of our hardware device. It's called the Sidekick 2. And what our measurement device does is it scans everything in Wi-Fi, so 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz. So this is the tool that we use to go on site to measure the signals of the access points, check for interferers, see what's going on in the environment, and have a full understanding of what we have there. A really cool feature I like to call out because I like to geek out around is our Just Go survey mode. New option that came into our survey application that runs on your iPhone or iPad if you've got the LiDAR scanner. And what it will do is it will actually map out for you as you walk around the floor plan. So it creates a floor plan as you move around. So it makes it really easy to capture survey RF data.
Hey, Matt, I got to see that in action last week, and I was pretty wild. I had never seen that before, and I think it's pretty cool. And not everyone has maps of their environments, so it's kind of a neat feature. I don't know what kind of plant were you growing there in that video there on that last slide.
So this was actually from our Helsinki office over in Finland, and I think they called it the living wall. So it is actually
Okay.
genuine plants that they've got there, and they've got to keep it alive somehow. I'm glad that's not my responsibility because my track record of keeping plants alive isn't too great.
Nice.
But yeah, no, when we first got to show this cool feature to people, I could see the excitement on their faces of actually getting to try it out themselves. I don't know, there's just something about just being able to plug in your Sidekick to your phone, just walk around without having to
Go.
tell it where you Yeah, exactly. Don't
Yeah,
have to tell it where you are, and then as you're moving around, it builds the floor plan for you and collects that data.
very cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. And one of the other things we recently launched into the survey application is making it easier to find if you've got any security vulnerabilities, such as like rogue devices, any access points that don't belong to your Wi-Fi network that might be connected to your LAN that you're unaware of, or causing you interference. So you can quickly see where they are in your environment, the impact that they're having, and go and locate them and remove them. Similarly, with the interference detection, because we've got a spectrum analyzer inbuilt to the Sidekick 2, it will find if you've got someone that's turned on a leaky microwave, or if someone's brought in some kind of like passive infrared device or wireless video camera, exactly where it is, the impact it's having, and then you can go and get it out of your network and environment. And also the last one about evaluating your encryption strength of your access points. Like I said, not everybody has Wi-Fi PhDs or experts these days. So being able to highlight if someone maybe unintentionally has enabled a weaker method of security for one of the networks, we're just highlighting it to make it a bit easier for people to see that. And on the topic of lowering the barrier of entry for uh, more IT professionals and guys and girls getting into the IT industry and maybe not having a full understanding of every kind of nook and cranny that you can do with Wi-Fi, the heat maps, configurations, things you can turn on, can turn off. We launched something that's called Optimizer, that what it'll actually do is once you've done a survey of your environment with collected data from the Sidekick 2, it will actually automatically analyze your specific network against your specific requirements and then give you step-by-step recommendations on ways to improve the performance of your network. So it's really cool because it's tailored to you. It has the best practices built into it and can give you specific recommendations. And it's presented to you in a really nice, easy way to see if you've got anything that's performing well, or if you're maybe something's yellow or red, then we know we've got some issues there that we want to try and fix.
So, Matt, I have a question. I think it's also on the mind of a lot of our viewers because I get this question and we get this customer question all the time is, so I'm getting new APs. Can I just replace my existing APs one for one?
That is a great question, and you're not only getting it, Dan. I promise you, we hear it a lot as well. And coming from the professional services background, I used to work for two Cisco Gold partners back in the UK. And whenever we was engaged in a opportunity with customers, when they're perhaps at that Wi-Fi lifecycle upgrade of maybe they've got some Wi-Fi 4 or Wi-Fi 5 access points, and they're ready to upgrade to the brand new 6 GHz Wi-Fi 6E access points,
Hmm.
one of the questions they would typically ask is, oh, can I just upgrade these access points to new ones and keep my existing locations? So we would get that question a lot. And uh, I would always say it depends. It really does depend on your environment. If you've got a great design that was done a few years ago that will be fit and meet the requirements for the new network, then potentially. But sometimes the way we wanted Wi-Fi to work 4 or 5 years ago isn't necessarily the same way we want Wi-Fi to work today. So the
Mhm.
best thing you can do is go and measure your environment and figure out what's going on there. And actually, I'm very happy I can reveal a little bit of a secret here. We do have a feature in Ekahau AI Pro that would what we call our network simulator, where you can simulate upgrading from Cisco 3802s to Cisco 9164s and seeing the impact that might have. But we're actually about to launch very soon a brand new tool that is actually going to be able to let you simulate upgrading to these new model access points, keeping the existing locations, and then seeing if it meets the requirements. But not only that, because perhaps maybe it doesn't quite meet the requirements of what you would want the new Wi-Fi network to do when upgrading to just new access points. Maybe you need to tweak that somehow slightly, perhaps relocate a couple of access points, maybe add in an extra couple of access points, or make some radio changes to meet those requirements. So a little preview of something that's to come very soon that we wanted to share with everybody on the session today. So yes, you totally can do it currently, and you'll be able to do it, but even on a bigger scale based off measured survey data without the need to draw any kind of walls or obstacles, which I think is pretty cool.
That's very cool.
So that was a bit of an intro on Ekahau and the importance of Wi-Fi. So what we're going to move on to now is the warehouse case study and also factor in 6 GHz best practices. We um we got tasked with helping out one of our partners, L'Oreal, with redefining one of their flagship warehouses over in Germany. I try and pronounce exactly where it is, but I always butcher it. It's in Mugnenstrom in Germany. So apologies anyone in is watching from Germany, and I've not said that correctly. But it's a huge warehouse, over a million square foot, and the kind of reasons why they are looking to do this new Wi-Fi deployment, design, and upgrade. They was at that natural life cycle upgrading their access points, but they were having a few challenges. So a lot of users were complaining that the Wi-Fi is slow. As they were traversing throughout the warehouse, they weren't roaming very quickly. So the experiences that the devices were dropping off, losing connectivity, it was really causing the IT staff a lot of headaches with a lot of support tickets. And we mentioned it before, Dan, about how important Wi-Fi is to businesses these days. And if you
Mhm.
factor in such a large scale operation where they've got to be scanning inventory with scanners and updating stock and making sure these go out, if Wi-Fi is the number one form of connectivity, which it is here, when the Wi-Fi isn't operating very well or at all, then it just grinds the business to a halt, which is just not something that is an option here. Lots of challenges when it comes to warehouses with different types of areas, ceiling heights, racking, mezzanines, and stuff. So we're going to cover the best practices and our kind of approach we took for that today. So whenever you're going into a Wi-Fi design, survey, deployment, validation, optimization, it's really key that you understand the requirements, not just the technical requirements, but the desired business outcome of the Wi-Fi network from the stakeholders. And when we was having these conversations with L'Oreal, they were telling us that this is the blueprint for all of their warehouses moving forward, and it has to be completely fully future-proofed. So when they said that to us, we were really thinking, okay, fully future-proofed Wi-Fi network for the warehouse. That translates to me is that it's got to support 6 GHz, because 6 GHz is going to be the driving factor for all Wi-Fi connectivity moving forward for the years to come. So we needed to factor that in. We were lucky in the fact that there's no legacy devices being supported in the warehouse that support only 2.4 gigahertz. You, like Dan, I know people watching this may have come across that in the past, that some old scanners or the forklift trucks, for example, might have a device on there that's really old that only supports 2.4 gigahertz. So that wasn't the case for us. So we could completely forget about 2.4. At a worst case scenario, it's 5 GHz, and then future proof and best case, it's going to be 6 GHz. And they just kind of said to us, we need it to work. It needs to be fully redundant. So if there's an issue that we lose an access point, there needs to be another nearby access point to provide that coverage whilst we go and get someone to swap out the AP or fix a cable or switch port. If something goes down, we need to have some resiliency there as well as some great roaming. So
So,
to
Matt, on this subject here, we already have a question here. Well, we
perfect.
have two actually, but on this topic, as we talk about future proofing their L'Oreal's warehouses going forward with 6 GHz, are we seeing 6 GHz clients yet in warehouses? That's the question.
Oh, great question. And actually, yes, this surprisingly enough, there are quite a lot of 6 GHz scanners are now available. So a lot of the I think the ones that they were using were Zebra ones, but Zebra have brought out 6 GHz capable scanning devices. But it's not just the scanning devices that we needed to support in the warehouse as well. Everybody has a mobile phone or a laptop or an iPad. There's a mixture of office environment plus warehouses. And I don't know about you, but I think I have at least 3 or 4 6 GHz devices now personally myself, especially with iPhone releasing their 6 GHz capable device back in September. We're going to see much more and more devices come onto the network that are going to be supporting 6 GHz. And of course, laptops have had it available for a while now. But great question, especially when it's specific to the warehouse industry. There are scanners available now that support 6 GHz.
Okay, thanks. And then there was one other question. An existing Ekahau user is asking, I think it's more along the lines of entitlement. And I think it was around the feature you were talking about as a upcoming feature a couple slides ago. Was it the optimizer? It was, will that be available for existing users free, or are they
Yes.
entitled to it?
If
Yes.
you're
Okay.
if you're talking about the new cool feature that's coming super soon, then
Yes.
yes, it will be available to all current Connect subscription holders. So if you have a current Ekahau
Awesome.
license that's active, you'll have access to this new tool and feature coming very soon. So it's not going to be an additional charge or anything else you'd have to pay for extra. Just as long as you have a current Ekahau license, then you'll be able to access it.
Very cool. Thanks.
No worries. Glad to be able to answer a couple of questions. It's nice to have people live in the chat asking these, so please feel free to continue. I
Definitely.
want to introduce you to the 1 million square foot floor plan to give a bit of a scale and reference for how kind of like big this place was and the different types of areas that we were tackling here. So everything that's highlighted in green, these were the racking aisle spaces. So the racks here, they were going up to around 13 meters high, and they also spanned over about 100 meter in length. So we needed to obviously plan accordingly for these areas. The space in blue was a little bit of a tricky area. This was the like big open space section. So lots of like pallets, lots of infantry being moved around, and you'll see stuff on like conveyor belts and things like that. So there wasn't really, there was still the super high ceilings going up to like 13, 14 meters high, but there was nothing really to attenuate the Wi-Fi here. So we had to think a little bit outside the box for how we wanted to cover this space. And then the orange is the mezzanine area. So there's a ground floor mezzanine and then a first floor mezzanine. And I'll talk about some of the challenges around the first floor mezzanine in a couple of slides time when we get to the particular type of access points that we was going to cover. And then the red areas were kind of deemed out of scope. So they had these areas rented out to other concessions inside of the warehouse. So these are the areas that we was focusing on, all with their own unique challenges and ways for approaching Wi-Fi design. So best practices for warehouse. We used the Cisco Catalyst series access points for the warehouse, and I was talking to Dan and the team, and I said, you know what, guys and girls, we actually got really lucky with this project because if I take you back to a few slides time where L'Oreal they said to us this has to be a completely future-proofed Wi-Fi network, and we were like, oh, that means 6 GHz. Well, I mean, 6 GHz is fantastic if you're not keeping up with Wi-Fi. Typically, before we had 2.4 and 5 GHz as frequency bands we could use, and then we got access to 6 GHz. It's basically like another lane you can drive on a motorway. But it came with its own set of caveats and requirements, and one of them being that with the device classification of low power indoor access points, we can't use detachable external antennas. So why would that be an issue then? Because if you're going to be designing for best practices for warehouses or large public venues, you're going to want to use access points that can have some level of directionality to shoot the RF in the direction you want it to go on, whether it be those large racking aisles or if you're doing a stadium where you want to aim at a certain block of seats or a maybe a massive conference like Cisco Live, Vegas. We see directional antennas everywhere. So there was a challenge, I would say, and we got very lucky with the timing. Is that when we got tasked with going to do the design and then to go on site, Cisco just announced the 9166D1. And why that was such good timing and really lucky for us is because the D1, it actually has inbuilt directional antennas, which is fantastic because this now meant we can design for best practices for warehouses, large public venues, schools, concerts, you name it, we can leverage this. So this was really awesome for you guys to come up with at Cisco, and we could then use it. So this is the predominant choice of access point we have throughout the warehouse. We did use the typical integrated Omni version of the access point, the 64 and the 62, and I'll show you a couple places that we use them in. But the first one to talk about is the high racking IO example. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to have these access points with the directional antennas inbuilt to them, one installed at either end of the aisle for that redundancy. So what we could do actually before we even went on site is we used our software called Ekahau AI Pro. And what that does is it allows us to build like a simulation predictive model of the environment. So we upload the floor plan, we scale it, draw all the obstacles. And once we've done that, we can then start placing the access points and we can then set everything like the height we want to install at. So 5 meters or 16 foot, mount it to the wall and then play with the angle of tilt and the transmit power that you wanted to use. So we simulated this all before we went on site to give us kind of like a bit of an idea of how many access points we think we're going to need and where we want to place them to kind of give us a bit of a starting point. Obviously, we would make some modifications, do some testing and changes when we got there, but to give us a kind of a good starting point, this was the approach that we wanted to take to meet the redundancy and the roaming requirements for the racking aisles. So then the large open space example that I was talking to you about, that area in blue, we actually still wanted to use the D1s here, but uh, not in like a typical conventional way. We did have some around the walls of the open space part of the warehouse, but actually what we wanted to do is suspend the access points and shoot it down from the top, from the ceiling, and just suspend it via a pole. And the reason why we wanted to take that approach here is to create a bit more of like a controlled cell size. Because if we use omnidirectional antennas here in such a large open space, it would be very hard to create a predictable, controlled cell size from the access point. So you could have, as an example, someone connecting from the bottom right-hand corner of the large open space to the access point in the top left-hand corner, which is not something we necessarily want them to do, because if you're connected really far away, it means you'd be able to transfer to Wi-Fi at slow speeds. So we really want to have clients connecting like logically, physically where they actually are. So that's why we went with this approach here. So an example of where we used the integrated omnidirectional access point is underneath the ground floor mezzanine, because the ceiling height here was actually 5 meters or 16 foot. And the way that it would be propagating and covering these areas, it would work perfectly fine with the integrated omnidirectional antennas. And also this meant we could use 6 GHz in this environment as well. The mezzanine floor, again, this was a bit of a challenge, because I don't know if you see my mouse cursor as I move it along here, but the back end, like the side of the warehouse towards, like, let's say the south side, that had a fully concrete wall. However, the wall of the mezzanine floor going towards the north side, there was no walls or anything there to attenuate the Wi-Fi. So if we had placed omnidirectional access points on the first floor mezzanine, they would just bleed out into like the main shop floor part of the warehouse. And it would create a lot of channel contention, and you would have clients connecting from the ground floor to the first floor mezzanine access point sometimes. And it's just not something we really wanted to do. So again, we took the approach of using the D1 Cisco Catalyst access point and pointing it down towards the floor of the mezzanine floor, creates a controlled cell size and also minimizes bleed out into the warehouse. Well, that's what we thought anyway. So obviously we wanted to test it, go on site and measure it, which we'll come to in a second. And then we also did something maybe a little bit controversial, or not in the most conventional way. The 9162 access point, because they wanted to have Wi-Fi everywhere, including when they were traversing between floors, so going into the stairwells. Typically, stairwells are like core parts of the building, so it'll be concrete or brick. So any access points around it barely bleed into the stairwell. So what we actually wanted to do here is put dedicated access points in the stairwells, and we mounted the AP on the wall like a clock. So it provides better coverage going up and down from the access point, rather than it going normally how you'd expect to see it when it's mounted on the ceiling. So sometimes it's okay to break the rules we found anyway. We went on site, and again, coming back to a little bit of luck here, we managed to get our hands on a couple of D1s from Cisco and Meraki. So thank you for that. And we was able to take it on site and conduct something that's called an AP on a stick site survey. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, what that basically is you take the access point that you're planning to install at your location, and what you'll do is you mount it on a tripod, power it up with a power pack, and then you'd configure it in the exact same way for your what your plans to in your design. You place it in those locations, and then you'd actually measure the real signal coming from that access point to make sure that it matches your simulation or your design, and update things like finding out attenuation materials for all of your obstacles. So the other thing I wanted to highlight here is why we decided to go with a 5 meter, 16 foot height. We wanted to keep the access points installed at the same height at one end of the aisle versus the other, and same angle of tilt. And the reason for this is it meant that it'd be more of a predictable roaming pattern for client devices if we knew exactly what the coverage was going to be between our access points. Um, so what stipulated that is the ground floor of the first floor mezzanine wall on the far side of the warehouse was at 5 meters. And this is where we could actually install the access point. So that's why we went with 5 meters on the other side of the warehouse as well. So once we got everything set up and tested, ready to go, what myself and Mac did is we grabbed our iPad, our Sidekick 2, and we just went for a walk. And what we're doing is we're collecting real RF data about that test access point, measuring it, finding out all information around the attenuation of the racks, the walls, any interferers, everything about the site that's really key for us to know to come back to our Ekahau AI Pro to update our predictive model. So things we can do here is change the height of the racking attenuation that we've set, plus how much it actually attenuates the Wi-Fi and any other materials as well, like walls and things like that. And once we did that, I can show you the comparison between the actual real measured signal from the Psychic 2 and that access point in that location, so the D1, versus what we got simulated. And if you take a look here, you can actually see the difference between two of them is so similar. What that meant is that we've actually built a really accurate simulated model of the environment, and it matches the reality from when you've got your access point there. And why that's so important is because that gives you great confidence to know is when you do your design, what you have simulated is actually going to match the reality. So that gave us the huge confidence to know what we was planning to do will meet the requirements for the Wi-Fi network. And I know what you're thinking. Gosh, you must have done a lot of walking over at that warehouse in Bugnenstrom in Germany. And yes, we did. We did. Apologies, my door just went. 1 second.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many steps he got here, but we did have a question here, Matt. I see your back,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
no problem. It was around AP selection, model selection, and I think we alluded to it, but I don't know if we've thoroughly covered it. But the question is really around why we went with a mixture of the 9164s and the 9162Is at
Sure.
for the warehouse there.
Okay, so the 64s, these model access points we went with in all of the typical kind of office space and underneath the mezzanine floors of the ground part of the warehouse. Because there's going to be quite a few devices connecting to these access points, and these are the 4x4 radios with the spatial streams, so they can handle more client devices. So
Yeah.
in the busier office spaces, plus where there's going to be more clients around the mezzanine on the ground floor. And then the reason why we went with the 9162s, these are the entry level model version of the access points that are 2x2s.
Yeah.
And these we were just planning to install in the stairwells because typically you might have one or two people in the stairwell at the same time
Yeah.
connecting. So it didn't need to be the kind of the higher entry level access points in those areas. So
Yeah.
it
So
was
basically
more,
a way to save a few dollars in the deployment. It sounds
yeah,
like. Yeah.
and
In the
these were
stairwells and other non-critical or non-essential places.
Exactly that. So it fit in for those parts of the environment really well, and was only going to be, you know, connecting a few devices at a time in the stairwell. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's why we decided to go with those. So D1s for pretty much the majority of the racking aisles, open spaces, and then the first floor mezzanine. Then offices plus ground floor mezzanine was 64s, and then the 9162s in stairwells and stuff like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad we clarified that. Appreciate that. So
No
the next
problem.
question is how many steps did you get in here in the warehouse?
That is a great question. I think over the time we was there, I think each of us all clocked up like 30, 40,000 steps over the few days.
Nice.
It was a proper hike. But the beauty of using Ekahau with the survey app and the Psychic 2 is that it's an extremely collaborative tool. So the survey application, what I was able to do is share the project file from myself to Mac, who also works at Ekahau, but
Nice.
also with the L'Oreal guys, so Canute and Henning. And what we was actually able to do is divide and conquer surveying the warehouse. So what you're looking at here is actually we have like four different survey paths, and that ties back to each individual that was covering the areas. So we could split up the surveying of the warehouse between us. And because the Psychic 2s are so consistent between devices, it doesn't matter. We all individually had an iPad and a Psychic 2, and we go and do the survey, and the data just gets automatically synced and collected, and then we can just work off that one project file, which was really handy. And that kind of but I can totally get why we got that question because if you had to walk near enough like a million square foot warehouse just by yourself a couple of times, it's going to be quite a few steps there. But that does tie in nicely to the new licensing model that we launched fairly recently called our Measure license. So if you needed to do exactly what we just did at the L'Oreal warehouse, divide and conquer large surveys, and you just need to go and collect survey data, you can actually buy just a survey-only SaaS-based licensing model from Ekahau. And if you wanted to do that and you don't have the hardware, the Psychic 2, you can buy the hardware now and it comes with a free 1 year Measure license. That's the difference between Measure and Measure Plus. And I wanted to show you what the currently deployed access point locations were because um, we collect a whole bunch of really rich RF data when we do our surveys, which we can then analyze and learn a lot from. And there's a lot of things we could actually do with the currently deployed access points in terms of understanding the locations, how it's behaving in the environment, but also as well, there was going to be a period of time between the new design that we come up with to when they go to actually buy the access points, get them delivered, run the cables, go and physically install the new access points. So what we wanted to do was leverage like that feature we was talking about before, Ekahau Optimizer, around ways we can, improve the performance of the Wi-Fi network. So with just a few configuration changes, whilst they're waiting for the new Wi-Fi network to go in, we could make some adjustments and enhancements to the performance of the network, and the users would benefit from that whilst they're waiting for the new Wi-Fi to go in. The other really cool thing we can do with measured survey data and knowing your existing AP locations is a feature that we refer to here as the zero touch provisioning at Ekahau. But what we mean by that is you've already got your access points claimed in your dashboard or in your Catalyst center. Your site's operational, but maybe you haven't imported the floor plans and you haven't placed the access points on the map, which is something I would highly recommend everybody does because the analytics and the really rich data that you can get from that, from knowing where your access points are, is tremendous. The amount of data from knowing if you maybe doing some location tracking, or perhaps if someone calls you up, Dan, and says, "Oh, hey Dan, I'm in the warehouse by the stairs by the mezzanine. I've got some issues with the Wi-Fi." You can just go into your dashboard, take a look at the floor plan and the AP exactly where it is, and then start your troubleshooting and save you some time. So there's a whole wealth of information and things you can get there. But one thing that we can now do with our partnership between Ekahau and Cisco, the Catalyst Center plus Meraki Dashboard, is once you've done the survey of your environment, like walked it with the Psychic 2, we know where all of your APs are physically located. So we're picking up those signals, we place them on the map for you automatically. You can change those positions if you need to, but we collect this measured survey data of your environment on your floor plan and know where your access points are. So what you can actually do now is push that survey data of those measured access points from Ekahau to your Meraki dashboard or to your Catalyst Center dashboard. And what it's going to do is if you go to Ekahau Insights and hit export, you can then just put in an API key and then you can pick your organization, what site you'd like to push to, and the floors you'd like to sync. You can even align the floors in the Ekahau dashboard before it gets to the Meraki dashboard. And what you then have is a fully provisioned dashboard automatically done for you, and it saves a whole heap of time. And also, if you haven't got to drag one by one, as well as a lot of manual work, I know I would probably make a couple of mistakes here and there, checking different names and serial numbers and drag and dropping. So it saves a whole bunch of time and is really helpful for future analytics of your network. So yeah, really cool feature that we love between us there.
Hey, Matt,
And
I
I
have a
know,
question here on the deployment type. So I
sure.
think we've discussed both here, but I believe this is a cloud managed deployment, right? Using our Meraki dashboard.
Yeah, the deployment for L'Oreal in the warehouse, their choice here is Cisco Meraki. So it's the Meraki dashboard with the Cisco Catalyst access points being managed by the Meraki dashboard.
Great. Thank you.
No worries. So I wanted to share what our kind of final design numbers was and how that looks. So it's going to be around 211 of these access points. 190 of them were going to be the D1s. And like I said, these are all the blue and the green ones that you can see here. So they were being used for the racking aisles, the long aisles to cover either end. And then the green ones, we're kind of taking the approach of like shooting from the top, pointing down to control the cell sizes. And then the orange and the yellows, these are the 64s and 62s with the integrated omnidirectional access point antennas for the access point. So the orange ones are the 9164s, and these yellow ones are the ones that were in the stairwells to provide that connectivity as you traverse from the ground floor to the first floor mezzanine. We have some tips on how we can be configuring the warehouse Wi-Fi. I'm not going to dive into every single one of these. I would recommend just grab a screenshot or pause the video if you're watching it on the recording. But there are a couple of them that I think is important to touch on because they will vary depending on your specific location and your environment. So first of all, like the transmit power range, again, you have to make sure you're being within the stipulation of your regulatory domain. Some people might say that you want to go over static power for your access points. We actually believe in most scenarios, you want your access points to have a little bit of dynamic flexibility. So to go up a little bit in transmit power and down a little bit in transmit power to account for maybe AP failures or some changes in the environment. So we think if you set more of a static range that allows the APs to go up and down according to the environment is really helpful. Channel widths and the channel plan, this I would say does definitely come down to your location and focusing here really on 5 and 6 gigahertz. Mostly 5 gigahertz, you're going to want to use 20 megahertz wide channels, and 6 gigahertz really probably depends on where you are. If you're in the EU or UK like myself, currently we have 500 megahertz of usable spectrum for 6 gigahertz. In the States, you get 1.2 gigahertz. So lucky you. You can potentially use wider channels and not have contention. Whereas we probably don't get that luxury. So we probably want to stick to the more narrow channel band plan. Then the channel plan of going for static and RRM, again, really depends on your environment. If you're surrounded by maybe lots of neighboring networks and access points, you're definitely going to want to have the RRM of the Catalyst Center or the Meraki dashboard, especially the auto RF feature, kick in and make these changes to adapt to what's going on. People bring in their own devices, your neighbors' devices change their channels all the time. A big thing, especially for some of these warehouses, they may be very close to airports and be susceptible to things that's called DFS radar events. And very quickly, that's just on 5 gigahertz. There's a certain set of channels that if they hear radar activity, they have to change. And if you remove all of those from your plan, it limits the amount of channels you can use. You might have contention. So things like Auto RF and the Meraki dashboard really tries to minimize the hits of DFS and keep your network as contention free as possible. So there's times where you want to take different approaches, but again, it really does depend on your unique environment and location and what's happening around you. So it's not always one size fits all. So just these are some like guides and rough best practices. But one of the things I'm a big fan on, especially, is like the single band SSIDs and making sure you get your devices to connect to the specific frequency band that you want to get them connected to. The only way you can really control that is by doing the single band SSIDs. Sometimes the clients don't make a great decision and they'll jump between the bands. So yeah, things to think about. But I wanted to leave you with the tips for configuration. And I know, Dan, you mentioned earlier we've got the longer video that we made from the warehouse available on YouTube. If you would like to view it, you can just go and scan that QR code. It'll take you to the link. If you want to see a bit more of at the warehouse and get some more context, you can go and watch the video there. So I'll leave that up for a few seconds. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Dan and the rest of the team behind Cisco Unplugged for inviting us on. I love to geek out and talk about Wi-Fi, if anyone that will let me. So thank you so much for having us here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. This was a great episode and really appreciate seeing kind of behind the scenes on the L'Oreal massive warehouse deployment. So that's really cool. Thank you very much. And I would encourage people to check out that link here to the video that I talked about at the start of the episode, and then kind of the next step there. You can check it out afterwards here. But looks like we're good on questions otherwise. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for tuning in this week on Unplugged. And would also like to remind everyone to please subscribe so you are notified when we do go live and post other great content on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@getunplugged. And you can also, if you want to follow up with us, You can reach out to us anytime. You can always connect through your Cisco account team. If you'd like to reach out, email us directly. You can reach out at getunplugged@cisco.com. You can also contact us on or follow us on Twitter, unplugged802.11, or on threads at unplugged connectivity. All right. Thanks again. I appreciate your time, Matt. Great having you on the show. And until next time, stay connected and unplugged.